Thanks for inviting me. I think this is my second APIsec con. Last year I was talking about API sprawl and the vulnerabilities associated with that, and now we get to look into a brand new AI topic. So, understanding the security implications of MCP, that's what I'm going to look into today. But first off, just a little bit about my background. Dan kind of let you guys know a little bit. Yeah, basically, I'm a tech journalist and editor. I have been following the API economy specifically since like 2014. So I'm a decade into this, you guys. And I feel like I know less and less with every passing week. There's just so much to follow. It's crazy. I also write for a handful of other publications outside of Nordic APIs, the blog I manage. I'm an active contributor to Lead Dev, CIO.com, InfoWorld, and a lot of these like enterprise tech developer oriented presences I'm submitting to lately on various topics. And AI keeps coming up everywhere, right? I'm based in Portland, Maine. New England's beautiful. Finally getting some sun out here. All right, let's move on. Yeah, just a little shout out about Nordic APIs. We were recently ranked the #1 API blog on the web by FeedSpot, so I can confidently say that. Um, it's someone thinks it's the top API blog out there. If you like APIs, definitely consider checking out this presence if you haven't already. It's all about strategy, design, security, even in the business aspects of having an API platform and more. And we're publishing about 3 to 4 weekly pieces on various topics in the API economy. Like Dan mentioned, we have a yearly platform summit. And if you like what we're talking about here, check out that event. It's going to be October 14th through the 15th is the main conference in Stockholm, Sweden. If you're in the EU and want to check it out, please consider this. We created a discount code actually for the event today. So if you type in PS25 hyphen APIsec, you'll get 10% off that conference. So sorry to shell another event, but I had to do it. So I write for a handful of publications, and recently I was really interested in model context protocol, and I put together this article for the new stack about how a recent exploit related to MCP is raising concerns. This is kind of important because people have been talking about MCP as if it's AI's new integration layer. But before we want to go too deep into all that, I want to reiterate I am not an MCP expert. I'm just a technically minded journalist, and a lot of this stuff is very fresh and still underway. A lot of what I say now might be irrelevant in a few weeks, but this is kind of where things are at, given the research I've done and the article I've put together. This is where things are standing currently, I believe. So it's just a little safe harbor about where I am and who I am coming into this. But let's take an even farther step back. I want to look at like what even is agentic AI right now. The way I define it lately is like we're granting AI agents more autonomy to optimize tasks and chain together increasingly complex actions. We're actually using this to affect real world actions as opposed to just chatting with the chatbot and have it spit back text. So we're giving it more autonomy than ever before. And this is a pretty interesting, and we've seen agentic AI really spike in interest across all domains. I mean, Forrester ranked it as the top trend in last year, and I think it's on the list for this year as well. Salesforce expects 1 billion AI agents in use by the end of next year. And so the momentum keeps going and keeps going. And where is this all going? Well, it's pretty much in use, say some executives I've talked to. It's more than just a hype, apparently. For this article for CIO.com that I put together, they say they're actively using this stuff to like enrich their sales pipelines, improve customer experience and support, automate random back-end tasks, simplify finance workflows, and even help some IT security in their domains. I was kind of skeptical at first, and then I started actually reading their case studies, and it seems like, okay, this is actually gaining some real world use. But still, in the back of my mind, I was thinking, well, where's the API and all that? Because people are making some pretty big statements. Like here's Kelly Romack, the chief digital and information officer at ServiceNow, saying, we're not just automating a handful of manual tasks and processes across a department or two. We're infusing AI agents everywhere to reimagine how we work and how we drive measurable value. So people are really tying in AI agents to deep business value. And when you do that, I mean, there's a lot that could go right and a lot that could go wrong for the use cases of an API security conference here. So taking that all with a grain of salt, I really believe like to truly have interesting, actionable agentic AI, you need API access. Combining APIs with AI agents could really accelerate them dramatically and give them far more interesting behavior than just what the LLM was originally trained on that's powering these agents. I mean, these AI agents are starting to orchestrate API calls beneath the scenes and chain together different interactions. I think we could really see some interesting developer oriented and end user oriented experiences coming out of this new wave. But without APIs, it's just retrieval augmented generation, right? You're just like accessing an external document and having the LLM parse that. So without APIs, we're stuck in this read only world. So that leads us to MCP. People are really excited about this because it gives us a way to standardize the connection between these AI agents and data, resources, tools, APIs. So people have been calling it the USB-C port for AI. Essentially, it's an open source protocol developed by Anthropic, the company behind Claude and Sonnet and such. And it's basically like the first proposed standard for agent to API communication. I mean, there have been others, and I'll get into that a little bit later, but this has been the one with like the most industry traction so far. MCP is essentially giving structure for large language models at the core of these AI agents to go out and consume services and tools and resources. And opposed to RAG, it's more active. So we're giving it both read and write capabilities and the ability, to call APIs and perhaps even other agents. So interest in MCP has grown significantly. If we look at the components involved, this is a pretty basic outline of the architecture. I mean, you'll have the user-based clients like Windsurf or Cursor or ChatGPT, and they have an LLM at that core, a large language model, which is interacting through the MCP protocol with MCP servers that are uh, that are coordinated with MCP tools. A layer below that are wrapping like APIs and data and resources. So this is a very basic description of kind of what's going on here and what's involved. And like I said, interest in MCP has really surged lately. There's this one directory called mcp.so, and they tracked 8,000 MCP servers. This was a couple weeks ago when I checked. It might be even more lately. A lot of technology providers, tools, and API services are exposing what they're doing with an MCP server. And it's getting some huge traction by AI companies and enterprises alike. I mean, OpenAI just committed to it as a standard, and Google just embraced MCP this week with native support in its SDK for its Gemini models. So it's definitely getting some traction, especially in the API space. I keep seeing so many articles and so many interesting tools that are becoming MCP based, and new MCP AI gateways are emerging. So a lot of interest in it. A lot of people are interested in developing around it as the core standard for agentic AI. And in the API space, the results are pretty positive. I think people are pretty positive on what this could enable. We've been chugging along with APIs for decades now, and I feel like this is kind of putting what we're doing on the map. I'd say MCP is enhancing the role of APIs considerably, because if you already have a well-structured RESTful API, it's pretty easy to, or relatively easy to create MCP servers, which can share those tools with an AI agent. So you're pretty well positioned, I think, if you're an API provider right now, or if you built your technology API first, especially using good security practices, which we'll get into in a second. So yeah, the API space has really jumped on this. But in all that rush, I started to notice that not really anyone was talking about security and the implications of all of this. And then it hit like a month ago. I started seeing an exploit here, another article about this hidden vulnerability in an MCP ecosystem here. Invariant Labs put out this exploit about a tool poisoning vulnerability they discovered. People started saying, hey, this actually doesn't have default authentication. This is insecure out of the box by definition. Some people on LinkedIn were saying this is a security nightmare. um, Exploits after exploits were being encountered, and so I was intrigued to dive a little bit deeper into this rabbit hole. There's so much excitement, but what are we potentially not seeing in rapid development? And that's such a common trend in technology, right? Like we're very excited about this idea, but maybe we're not considering day two concerns or how this affects security in the enterprise and such. And some reports started to come out. It quickly found that 43% of MCP servers contain command injection flaws. 22% allowed accessing files outside intended directories. Some other stuff around unrestricted URL fetching and more. So it wasn't just all nice and a happy MCP day. We started to see some downsides of this new protocol in the wild. Kevin Swiber, an API strategist at Layer System, went as far to say that the security concerns are very real, very real. So I trust this person. They're looking into API and MCP as an expert on the space, and I featured Kevin in the article I wrote that I mentioned earlier. So let's dive into the rabbit hole even a little bit deeper and look into some of these model context protocol security vulnerabilities that researchers have discovered. And this is just a couple of them, really. There's been some others since I put all this together, actually. First off is tool poisoning. So this is what I mentioned, and I'm specifically referencing some studies by Invariant Labs, which you can check out. They've become one of the experts covering this. This is when an untrusted MCP server injects malicious instructions into the tooling descriptions themselves. So if you're familiar with some of those large language model issues that the previous speaker covered, actually, this is kind of a type of indirect prompt injection. And the researchers were saying that this could affect everything from ChatGPT, Cursor, to Zapier, and others that are actively using MCP servers and potentially using malicious instructions in their tooling descriptions. So this could enable some stealthy data exfiltration. And the researchers of this study, they were able to show that, yeah, they were actually able to, I think they used a WhatsApp MCP server to get some sensitive data from users. And so they proved that this is possible. Another vulnerability is rug pulls. So this is like that classic supply chain style bait and switch where you have a trusted MCP tool, but then it becomes malicious after it's being approved and after it's already built upon and integrated into that ecosystem. So this is kind of hard to detect once it's installed and someone's made a change to it, um, because developers aren't always actively monitoring things, and you might not realize something has been changed or the rug has been pulled out from under you, so as to speak. And this has a high impact due to just the autonomous nature of AI agents and how they're working and how they're executing their functions. So rug pull is something to think about right now. A third is tool shadowing. So this is when a malicious tool manipulates behavior of tools from another server. These MCP architectures that are being developed, they're often like pretty integrated with one another, and agents might talk to other agents, or you might have tools popping up in other agent communications. So if one is corrupt, it could affect others in that architecture. I believe that's what they're referencing in this research. So this could create some unexpected cross-server interactions and bypassing some security, uh, sandboxing and awareness that you've already built into your systems. Essentially, you could redirect and listen in on things, kind of like man in the middle attacks through tool shadowing. And then lastly, some of these vulnerabilities could end in remote command execution or RCE. So this is when some MCP servers allow unsanitized input to execute system commands. This is kind of the worst thing that could possibly happen. With RCE, it enables attackers to just run arbitrary code like on your system. So it's kind of yeah, that could be bad. And just to echo that study I referenced earlier, 43% of servers tested had command injection flaws. So this is something to consider. So we looked into some of these security vulnerabilities associated with MCP, right? Well, we should take it with a grain of salt. The CTO of Invariant Labs does say that MCP itself generally doesn't have a security issue per se. It's more like the underlying vulnerability is actually a problem with the models. So I think that's valid and good to point out here. But he does say that with all the interest in MCP, we're kind of losing sight of some of these vulnerabilities that should be addressed. So I think it's still relevant to the MCP discussion. So we know of some of these risks. Let's talk about some of the recommended MCP security mitigations that people are just starting to wrap their heads around. Well, there are two kinds of MCP servers, as I've come to understand it. There's something called a remote server and a local server. There's been more standardization around the local server, so developers are tending to rely more on these local servers. Um, Often, these servers rely on unvetted packages just from public repositories that can be downloaded. So that kind of stuff poses a bigger supply chain risk. And if anyone here is, familiar with supply chain issues, it's just kind of the same thing. These local servers run with whatever user level operating system permissions are in place. So that could be a potential vulnerability in of itself. And, you know, hackers might use that as a way to expose unsafe functions or exfiltrate data, or, not just data, but keys and sensitive information as well. So be careful with local MCP servers. I should say that there. Another way to avoid some of these vulnerabilities is to scan the servers before you're putting them into use. There is an open source scanner out there called MCP Scan that can help you validate your MCP servers. And I think there's plenty more coming out to market too. Avoid blindly downloading third-party MCP servers. Make sure it's coming from a trusted repository from a trusted provider. Watch out for things like typo squatting. I mean, it's super simple, but it gets people still. And there's probably some social engineering that could go on here that could lead to, MCP defects. And just lock down unsafe tool capabilities. I mean, if you're exposing an MCP server yourself, and you don't want it to have access to something that could be sensitive, or a function that an AI agent might not, you don't want them to interact with. That's good to consider here. Essentially, these agents are indeterministic, they're autonomous. It's hard to predict how they're going to react and how they're going to integrate with your systems. Um, so, API security best practices apply. As the CTO of Apollo told me recently, AI agents can't directly connect to production APIs. That's a security and a governance nightmare. So essentially, because of what I was just describing, the autonomous, indeterministic nature of them, it is really important to use some sort of abstraction layer between the AI agent and the API. So it's becoming a best practice, to use that abstraction layer, such as an API gateway, to enforce policies, have rate limiting in place, and really decouple the two. I think rate limiting is a big concern here, because you don't really know how much these agents are going to send requests, and really build up your server spend in the process too. So don't connect AI agents directly to production APIs. I think, like everyone is going to say in this conference, check out the OWASP top 10 for API security best practices. It's a great place to start. A lot of those basic fundamentals apply here. Good authentication, strong authorization, identity and access management, and tracking that throughout this whole ecosystem. Essentially, I think it was someone at Okta was publishing an article talking about, how we should treat MCP servers as OAuth resource servers, not as, OAuth servers. We should be like giving that ability to the identity servers themselves that are well versed in this already and can handle that complex identity and authorization and access management logic. So it's kind of a mouthful, but just some responses that people are kicking around to all this MCP stuff. But the good news is, if you are here and if you're an API security expert and you're doing all the good things that API security minded developers should be doing, I think you're far better positioned for MCP. And that's kind of become like the general industry consensus. So if you're arming your APIs correctly, if you're using an API gateway, you already have good authentication and authorization, you'll be way better prepared for this new agentic AI future. And yeah, I don't want to discount anything. I think the future of all this looks pretty bright. The future of AI is really interesting. This standard itself is pretty new. I think we'll start to see new threat vectors emerge. But Anthropic themselves, they have some good plans for the future. They want to release some standardized registries soon. They've committed to easier versioning practices, and they're looking into how best to, produce authentication add-ons to help people secure MCP. And they're pretty open to community contributions, since this is an open source project. That's it. End
That's
program.
it. All right. Well, thank you, Bill. Quite a lot of chatter on the side here, and
Oh yeah.
a lot of people asking for your slides. So I don't know if
Oh
you're willing
yeah.
to share them or not. But how can people get in touch with you?
I have a slide for that. I'm glad you
I
asked.
thought you might. Thought you might. There you go.
Follow this guy. I have a portfolio website, Doerrfeld.io, and I use my last name, Bill plus Bill, on socials. So I'm on LinkedIn, Blue Sky recently, as well as the X. Still keeping that going. I built
Yeah, right on.
a few thousand followers there, and it's hard to see it all go. Uh, but
No,
whatever.
no, no doubt. Well,
Yeah,
thank you. Super
absolutely.
interesting, and I think the audience very much appreciated it. This is such a new area. You opened up with, you're not an MCP expert, but honestly, I think you probably are, right? Even if you don't feel like you are. Like, it's so new. It's coming so fast. I mean, is anybody, right? And the fact that so
Yeah.
many are asking for your slides, it's like you're sharing some really good value here.
Oh, cool. That's great to hear. Yeah, it's once you're into this stuff, it feels like you know so much less because there's so much going on every
It's
moment. But
it's
yeah,
wild. I mean,
happy to share what I'm learning.
yeah, and we'll find a way. I don't know if you have it, if it's linked or somewhere. We'll put it into our follow up emails or something. You were talking about like these vulnerabilities and like the config issues, like allowing sensitive or high risk operations to be performed. They're not turned
Cool.
off, and it sure felt like, geez, isn't there a scanner or something for that? And Corey actually posted from Invariant Labs. It looks like there's an MCP scan. Are you familiar with tools that will help you look at your environment and see if you're set up okay, or at least you're doing the basics?
Yeah, yeah. MCP scan. I recommend checking that out. That's a free open source resource. I think that's one of many that are being developed, I believe.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, just do a couple searches on GitHub for MCP scanner tools, and you might find some others. I'll try to, cover this soon. Actually, that's we should do like a roundup of that on Nordic
You know
APIs.
what? We'd love to have you on a webinar to talk about it. Clearly, this is a hot topic, and you've done a ton of great research here, and appreciate you sharing with everyone here. Do From Hassan, do you think we'll see an OWASP top 10 for MCP in the future?
I would not be surprised.
Yeah,
Uh,
it seems like.
yeah, it seems like last year I was just syncing with Steve Wilson, who runs the top 10 for LLMs. I feel like people don't even know that exists. So let's get that one up there and
It's
on people's.
incredible. Like, the first OWASP top 10 for web apps, I think they refreshed it like in 10 years, right? And then AI API came out, they refreshed it in 4 years, and then
Yeah.
LLM came out, they refreshed it in 12 months, it's
Oh,
just.
yeah, they're moving really quickly with that project, yeah.
Yeah, they have to. Well, listen, I gotta stay on schedule here. So folks, definitely follow Bill. You've got all his info. Thank you, man. I really appreciate you being here, buddy.
Absolutely, yeah, had a blast.